Everybody ready to start?
Ready to go?
Yes.
Okay, great. So I'm going to open the Yamhill County Board of Commissioners formal session for June 16th, 2022. It is 10:02 in the morning. And Commissioner Sterrett, would you mind leading us in the flag salute, please?
Yes, thank you. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. So item C is calendar session, and I didn't see any additions other than I believe there was supposed to be a Newburgh community discussion this Saturday. Does that sound familiar? I had that written down, but I didn't have any details.
I'm not aware of that, Chair, just that it is Sheridan Hometown Days. And I think we've already noted that for last week's.
Okay, Commissioner Cool, anything?
I don't think I have anything more.
Okay, Ken and Christian, anything to add?
Turn on my microphone. Just a reminder, just that county offices are going to be closed on Monday in recognition of the Juneteenth holiday.
Great, thank you. Okay, item D is public comment. This time period is reserved for public comment on any topic other than an agenda item, a quasi judicial land use matter, or a topic scheduled for a public hearing. Do we have any public comment in the audience or virtually for anything that is not on the agenda?
I do have a form for public comment, but it's for agenda item J1, which is the public hearing, the budget hearing later in the agenda. But otherwise, I don't think we haven't received any other requests for public comment, and we're not seeing any attendees in the audience, the Zoom audience.
Okay, great, thank you. We did receive a little bit of written comment yesterday, so I just wanted to note that. Okay, so item E is department updates, and we are supposed to be joined by our county clerk, Brian Van Bergen.
Yes, I forwarded an email to the commissioners yesterday that we received from Brian, stating that he was unable to attend this morning's session due to work in Marion County that he's currently doing this morning with regards to some recount items. So again, he just sent an email, said he was unable to join this morning.
Do we have a time to reschedule? Because I believe the clerk's last day is the 30th. Would he be able to join us next Thursday, the 23rd?
He did make that offer. I was exchanging several emails with him because I also was reminded him that we have the Zoom option, if he could step out from whatever he's working on at Marion County to join the session today. I do know in speaking with Commissioner Kula, who's not going to be here on the 23rd, but you were really interested in hearing the update as well. And I reminded the clerk that you weren't going to be here on the 23rd, and I know the full board was interested. He did suggest the 23rd. Otherwise, we'd be looking at the 30th, which is his last day in office. It would be the final day, is that Thursday. So Commissioner Kula, I think it's up to you. You know, to a certain, not being here, and if the board,
friendlier look than I got.
if the board would like to schedule have Brian come back on the 23rd, and then if you have any questions specifically that you would like to have addressed, or areas, you could give them to me or send them directly to Brian, and then he can address that during his update.
Certainly, and I can watch the update then once the video link is up as well.
And the other
Commissioners,
thing
I would just add too, you can always schedule a special session. If you are
Yes.
that interested in hearing from the clerk before he leaves office, you can always schedule a separate meeting to hear from him at a time other than 10 a.m. on Thursday.
I think there's some impetus to having an update, sort of a after action, and we've had a lot that's happened in the clerk's office over the last year. And I know I'm getting a lot of questions from people who are asking about the administrative hand recount. You know, that was just finished, I believe yesterday, the day before, and what that means and how it occurs. And they also had questions. I'm getting questions about the voter rolls and how we address that. So there are a lot of constituent questions that I don't feel comfortable answering. There's a lot of technical information that needs to be conveyed. I would love to have that coming from our clerk so that we can have constituents have those questions answered. So I would like to have him here on the 30th if we can, because it really is important, especially nowadays. People are very hyper vigilant about elections, election results, election integrity, and I don't feel comfortable answering those questions.
Attempting to, Well, I'd certainly be open and delightful to. I would be delighted to have him come on the 30th as well.
Right. So we can ask.
So
I can even do it if you want me to. I can do hey, since I'm going to be out next week, I'd love to have you attend on Thursday.
Commissioners, I would, the only thing about the 30th is that, you know, one of the things on my list is to check in with him about how the transition is going. And if we wait till the last day, I feel like that doesn't really help us understand how the transition is going, which is why I'm quite disappointed that he decided not to come today. I think there's a lot of questions that we have that the public would be interested to know in terms of how this office is going to be handled once he's gone on June 30th. And so that's the only thing that would make me hesitate on the 30th and have him come on the 23rd.
The one part that I would mention, and I know this is, there's a discussion later in the agenda as well, specifically to this topic, but I've been working very closely with the chief deputy clerk, and she's been providing regular updates on, you know, because I've been, again, checking in daily and getting daily updates from Carrie Hinton, kind of on the status of things. We do have IT working closely and having follow-up conversations with the clerk to make sure, as far as there's a lot of systems that are connected to the county network, and for, you know, a lot of the election equipment for security reasons and a laundry list. So we do have IT working in there. We have the staff is working directly with Carrie and preparing for this change that's happening. And I guess the biggest thing that I would just say that, you know, I have all the confidence in our chief deputy clerk and the staff, and, you know, that the public should not see a disruption in services when the position goes vacant. And they also know that I'm a phone call away if there's additional resources needed. And if we need to bring in, whether it's facilities, IT, outside contract, you know, whatever we need to do to make sure that we're keep things functioning. You know, that's just something I just want to share both publicly and with the board here, that
communicating with Brian. We're trying to navigate through this transition and carry him. She's on a well-deserved and probably well-needed vacation right now, because I know she's going to be really busy in the coming months. So, and I'll continue to provide regular updates and on kind of the status of things. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, Carrie's doing a phenomenal job. I'm more concerned about, from the current clerk's perspective, how the transition's going. And also we had some questions during the budget committee process that were unanswered in terms of how much the recalls are going to cost, whether or not we're seeing the same type of ballot issues that we saw in the commissioner recall, this in the primary. So I would appreciate having him on before he leaves. So whichever day, the consensus is fine. I just think we need to have those questions answered.
I mean, I'm open to an earlier, like a Tuesday, if Chair, if you feel like it's just too, oh my gosh, it's so confusing. It says Commissioner Vice Chair beside your name. I'm gonna need to not look at that. It's Chair. If in order to have a little bit of time after the presentation to maybe either get things changed or shifted, if a Tuesday would be better of that last week of him being in office. I'm open to that. We should probably also make sure that the clerk is available.
To clarify, not next Tuesday.
Right, yes.
It'd be a week from
The
Tuesday.
28th, I guess.
Well, just realistically, I don't know what that 2 days would net us.
Yeah.
Ultimately, the purpose of scheduling it for today was so that we had some lead time. And then next week, you're not here.
Mhm.
And then the next week is the last day. It is disappointing. And there are an awful lot of questions. We're heading into a general election of some significance.
Mhm.
And that office is critical. And we just need to have some confidence that not only the transition, but sort of what transpired. We've had 4 recalls, primary, and unprecedented in terms of what their responsibilities have been with an office that has been understaffed and people working literally round the clock to get this work done. So I do have some concerns. I have great confidence, but I have concerns that we're not getting our questions answered in a public forum. So I'll just leave that there.
So Commissioner Kula, I mean, I'm going to defer to you on what you're comfortable with next week, but would it be acceptable, since you're not going to be here, would it be acceptable to submit questions and then Ken can just make sure that Brian answers them in the meeting next Thursday? I don't know. It's up to you. This is an important topic, so.
Yeah, I mean, I would appreciate it if we can delay it a week, but if it has to be next week, then I can certainly submit questions.
Because a couple of times I think Ken had asked that if we had any questions to get them to Ken so we can get them to Brian so he could be prepared. So I don't know I know I submitted a couple, but so if maybe we all submitted questions this way, Brian knew where we were, what our questions were or constituent questions.
Sure.
Well, and if we wanted to proceed with the 23rd, if the board would like to proceed with the 23rd and then with the questions, but then if it requires an additional work session, because maybe there was questions that may come out of that session, just like Christian was sharing, we could look at scheduling maybe that following Tuesday, that could be something that could be discussed and scheduled depending on how the board would like to proceed.
It could always be scheduled with the chief deputy county clerk as well in July.
Correct.
But I'm talking about sort of like the historical perspective.
Yeah.
And we've had a clerk for 8 years. Well, no, for 6 years.
Yeah.
So I would just like to hear from him one last time.
And then I'm more than happy to present the questions. Just a reminder, he is an elected department head and I don't have the authority to, I can persist and remind and, and hopefully he'll be responsive to the board's questions, but ultimately,
Duly noted.
I have no authority over elected department heads.
Much to your dismay, oftentimes, right?
No
No comment.
comment.
There you go. He has a seatbelt on.
Thank you for pursuing that.
All right, so we'll go ahead and schedule for the 23rd. We'll move this update to the 23rd, and then any questions that you have, I will in advance that you would like Brian to be prepared. I will share those with him, and then next week, if the board decides that we'd like to schedule a follow-up session, we can do that as well.
Great, sounds good. Commissioners, is that acceptable?
That works.
We don't have a lot of leeway here, so yes, thank you.
I would say I'm around tomorrow.
Okay, so that takes us to our work session. We have no work session today. Item G is the consent agenda. There's several items on there. Do I have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
We approve the consent agenda as presented.
Thank you, Commissioner Starrett, Commissioner Kula moves approval of the consent agenda. Do I have, is there further discussion?
No, Chair.
Sorry, I'm a little distracted. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed, same sign. Okay, consent agenda is approved. Item H is old business. We have no old business, and that brings us to item I1, consideration of approval of the quote and purchase of 18 Lenovo ThinkPad L14s and 12 M70Q desktops from Lenovo in the amount of $30,690. Do I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Commissioner Starrett moves approval. Is there further discussion?
No, Chair.
Okay, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed, same sign. Motion passes. Item I2 is consideration of approval of an agreement between Yamhill County Health and Human Services and the Dayton School District to provide behavioral health counseling for the 2022-23 school year not to exceed $64,199.88 effective September 2022 through May of 2023. Do I have a motion to approve?
Chair, I move approval of item H2.
Commissioner Starrett moves approval. Is there further discussion or comment?
No, Chair. Oh, Ken.
Just for clarification on the motion, it's agenda item I2.
I'm sorry, I2. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, if no further discussion, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed, same sign. Okay, motion passes. Item I3 is consideration of approval of a contract between Yamhill County and the Cambridge Consulting Group, LLC, for the update of the Yamhill County Ambulance Service Area, or ASA plan, in the amount of $37,900 effective upon approval. And I just want to thank Colton for his work pulling this together. Do I have a motion to approve?
I move that we approve item I3.
Commissioner Kula moves approval. Is there further discussion?
Oh, I just want to add that there also is a short window that they will get the work completed. So it's not one of these things that's open-ended. I was appreciative of that.
Yeah.
Just a number of months. So thank you for Colton and Christian and the ASA subcommittee worked on this.
Thank you. Okay, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed, same sign. Okay, motion passes. And that brings us to item I4, which is discussion of the Yamhill County Clerk vacancy that will occur on July 1st of 2022. And so I'm not sure which commissioner put this on the agenda, but if you want to sort of lead the discussion as to why this was added, otherwise I can kind of start with my thoughts.
Chair, I think that we discussed this a while back when we got the announcement, and so all of us put it on the agenda with the help of staff. Just
Okay.
Nobody's owning up to it, is what Commissioner is saying.
Well, we've had a lot of discussion, as Commissioner Kula notes, And we have talked to County Council and County Administrator about our options in terms of what happens on July 1st. Christian, do you want to kind of give us the calendar of events in terms of the vacancy and the filing and all of that, just so the public is aware of how that is and we can recap that?
Yeah, we had a conversation with the clerk a while back and looked into the process, and so the vacancy officially occurs on the 30th. Folks who are interested in filing to run for clerk in November can begin to file 5 business days after the vacancy. So given the holiday, I think that's, depending on how you count your days, and I'm never quite sure exactly how to do that. It's either Thursday the 7th or Friday the 8th, but they'll be able to confirm that with the clerk's office. And then I believe the filing is open until, I want to say, August the 19th, but don't hold me to that exact date. Again, that information would be available through the clerk's office, and then so folks could file, and then those candidates would appear on the ballot in November. And a little bit more about the vacancy. The board is not obliged to fill the vacancy. It can remain vacant until the election or until the office is filled in January. In the interim, by statute, the chief deputy is obliged to perform all the duties and functions of the clerk. You could also appoint someone in the interim to fill the vacancy. So those are options that the board has.
Great, thank you. So commissioners, I kind of see these as 2 separate processes. So the elections process is sort of one side, and then we have the responsibility of what happens over the next 6 months from July through December. And obviously we have a major election during that time period. In terms of our options, I've been leaning towards an appointment, and my reason for that is because I feel like an appointed person they're assuming the responsibility of being the elected official. They are the elected official in essence at that point. And there's a different relationship with the public when you do that. It's not just a county staffer that's assuming the role. It's I am now the elected official and I'm directly accountable to the public. And I think after what we've seen in Clackamas County and just the disaster that happened there, this position is critical. Our voters here have to have confidence in the integrity of our elections. I think it's important to have somebody who is impartial and really is dedicated to making sure that the public maintains that level of trust. And so for me, that's just kind of how I see this is, we have a vacant position that's an elected official over the next 6 months, but we have this major election happening. And so, what's the best way for us in our role to kind of make sure that the public has a heightened level of direct interaction and just confidence is what I would say, confidence in the election. I think Carrie Hinton has done a phenomenal job. She's really seemed to excel in this role as the deputy county clerk. And like Ken said, she has been really connecting and communicating on a daily basis in terms of how that office is going to transition. She's handled it as we would expect a leader to handle this process. It's not a process that she asked for, it was kind of handed to her, but she really has stepped into it and taken a leadership role. She's made executive decisions, and as recently as last week, that the role of a clerk would make if they were elected. And I just feel that she's somebody who would handle the next 6 months with a very high level of integrity and impartiality. We've seen we've seen some of her colleagues, not just staff members in the office, but some of the elections workers come forward and say, you know, we have full faith and confidence in her to do this job over the next 6 months. And so that's really great to see. And, you know, there's also an issue kind of internally, an issue of pay equity, right? She's doing the job. And yet if we keep her at the deputy level and don't appoint her, she's missing out on potentially the proper salary and compensation that would be afforded to her if she was appointed. So there's some pay equity type of issues there as well. So that's where I'm leaning, and I'm curious what your thoughts are.
Well, may I ask a clarifying question of you, Chair? Is that?
Oh yeah.
I don't know the decisions that she's made. You suggested that she's making decisions that the clerk would be making, and I just want to note that the clerk is still in office. So was there something different than what the clerk should be making, or?
Sure, yeah, and maybe Ken can speak a little bit more to this, but she has made an executive decision to hire an additional person that was needed, desperately needed in the office. And so she's kind of already assuming the role of what the clerk would do. And she's being given leeway to do that. And so I see that as a leadership executive function role. And she's kind of taken charge and saying, you know, this is what we need to make sure that our elections function properly. And I have the staff that I need to do this.
Okay, I just want to make sure we're not hitting things.
Well, in
Future.
in her current position, she is, even though she's in an appointed position, she is in an appointed managerial position.
Yeah.
So she does have the ability to make decisions, you know, hiring decisions. She has been keeping the clerk informed of those, you know, because again, you know, Brian's still in office. And so she hasn't been able to exercise full executive authority without consultation with Brian, because Brian still is the clerk. So, I mean, and Brian's been, to my knowledge, supportive of the decisions that she's been making, but she is making sure that the clerk is informed on decisions that need to be made.
Yeah.
So, but again, you know, in her current role as a manager and as the chief deputy clerk, she is empowered by her job description and by statute to exercise all of the functions of the clerk in his absence, or even if he's in another meeting, you know, she has the ability to do that right now per the job description. You know, I'm just putting that out there, what the board wants to do as far as appointment and things like that. I will say that if there is consideration of doing a formal appointment of Carrie to that position, like I said before, she's out of the office, and maybe you've already had discussions individually with Carrie, but I would want to make sure she's comfortable, you know, other than taking a board action. And then if she says no, or because I don't know what her decision is. And I think one of the parts that I've kind of struggled with, and I know county council and I have talked about this, is that, you know, we have chief deputies in, you know, for a reason to be able to step in, you know, to help with coverage situations and to help the elected official if they're not available or in absences. This one's a little bit different because we're talking 6 months, a pretty lengthy time period. And honestly, I'm still also trying to get my arms around kind of the administrative mechanics associated with taking a regular full-time appointed employee, even though the position is non-bargaining. It's, you know, it's a non-bargaining manager position, on appointing to an elected position, and what that means as far as the transition goes, because a lot of times that that may mean a break in service, and there's some things that are tied to the salary and benefit package for an appointed employee versus an elected, you know. There's some things that I'm still trying to sort out the mechanics of that. It's not unusual. In the past, I can think of several examples where we have staff that have run for office and still were in appointed positions and they continue to work. But this one's a little bit unique because we're talking about a vacant position. So it's not unusual, the other scenario. And they've basically continued as a regular employee until they took office. Derek, the assessor, is a good example of that. Probably the most recent example, the sheriff as well. That they were in appointed positions and then they continued to work until they officially took office in their existing positions. This one, I still struggle to a certain degree on the mechanics of that. And
May I ask a clarifying question? It sounded like you were about done.
yes, I am.
Okay.
Yeah.
I know you a little bit now. Is there a mechanism by which you can essentially add to the existing salary package of the chief deputy clerk so as to recognize the actually assuming as opposed to the theoretical assuming of clerk duties in a way that really like reflects what the clerk compensation is?
Absolutely.
Okay, that's good.
They're and that's also not unique. We've done that in the past to whether the board wants to approve. Carrie would still continue as the chief deputy clerk and would be doing all the functions of the vacant office, but then the board could, in recognition of the fact that the office is vacant for the next 6 months and she's going to be exercising the full authority of the office without having the clerk to kind of run things through. And that comes with a lot of challenges and associated with that the board could approve an additional incentive in recognition of taking on that additional responsibility.
Okay, great, thank you.
Couple of things come to mind. When Carrie left the administration office and went over, it was, I'm assuming, accepting the position of deputy clerk is sort of like the vice president. You know, you're one heartbeat away. I know that there have been discussions with our clerk in the past about term limits and that whole issue. So I think there was always the hope that we would be able to address that issue so that we wouldn't lose the clerk. But we have lost him, and in 2 weeks we will not have a clerk. I've just been really keeping my eye on what's been going on in Clackamas County. And, I live on the border of my property ends where Yamhill County and Clackamas County begin. And so I've got a lot of neighbors who have concerns about that. And just watching that play out, just see the gravity of it. To be rudderless, even if it is, Carrie Hinton has been functioning in many respects as the clerk. Our clerk has been working part-time in Marion County during a primary. And this has required Carrie Hinton to not only take on those duties, but to work under fire because, again, as I mentioned, short-staffed, and we have had an excellent former chief deputy clerk, Gail Jensen, who is trying to retire, but we've been calling her back into service. She is going to be retiring finally on June 30th. I think she's going to just change her phone number so we don't bring her back, but she's done an excellent job. But we're going to be losing her as well. I think it's important we have stability there. And I think it's important that we recognize that Carrie Hinton has functioned as the clerk. We should have a clerk, and that will go a long way, not only in confidence in the voters, but also addressing the fact that this is what this woman has been doing. So I would be in favor of an appointment at this point. 6 months is a long time when you're in the middle of a primary. I'm sorry, general election.
All right, well, I appreciate hearing both of your slightly different reasons for wanting to take action to appoint Carrie Hinton to the position. Knowing that she is and will be taking on all of the responsibilities, because we know that she knew that, as you noted, when she accepted the position. Appointment to me is a process that is inherently political, because we're not asking the public to be the ones to appoint. We are doing the appointment. And by that process, I feel like an appointment process would be best opened up to the people who might be interested in being appointed to it. And thus I'm not interested in that, because I want to make sure that the person who's most skilled, most ready to do the work is doing the work, is the one doing the work. And so I will say that I have a little bit of my own internal conflict, because it feels like the process, if we're appointing, it should be something that's open to the public, similar to how we've done appointments that have landed us with Representative Sharp and Representative George, if I got this right.
Yes.
Where it was the people who had an opportunity to submit, and we considered them and had a process. I'm not interested in that for this, because I want the person who is doing the work right now to be doing the work going forward. And so that's just where I am right now, is I'm more comfortable with the scenario where we keep her in her chief deputy clerk role, partly because at this very moment where we are right now, we know that she is accepting of that role. If that makes sense. So we don't know, as you noted, whether she wants to be the appointed clerk, or whether she'll run for office. We can set that aside too. So that's my real practical thing, is I personally am very comfortable communicating to the public that we have a competent leader there who's going to run a great election that's fair and transparent and open, and counts all the ballots as they should be, with the person we have now, but giving her a pay raise. So that's kind of where I'm sitting right now. And just because of that, my mind goes to an open appointment process.
Chair, if I could just jump in, and that
Yeah.
Sure.
brought something to mind when you brought up the where we dealt with we had Representative Neerman, and then we had to make an appointment, and that was a whole separate process because you had the PCBs involved and
Right.
that whole thing. But I think in this particular case, I think it perhaps would be something we could leave sort of in limbo, if you will, if we didn't have, as I said, the gravity of an ongoing election. But I think that the appointment process will play out in terms of whether or not our chief deputy clerk chooses to run for this office is not germane to this discussion, and I don't want it to be.
Mhm.
What we do know is that when she took this position, she knew she could be functioning as the clerk.
Mhm.
She is now in that position. So the public will have an opportunity to make a decision on who they want to be clerk, because as Christian mentioned, July 5th, July 7th, 8th, anyone who's interested in that position can file and run for that position. Whether Carrie Hinton does or doesn't, it doesn't matter. Right now, I believe we need a clerk, and it's inherently, I believe, non-political in that I just had a little editorial comment. I have never met a more apolitical person in my life. The kind of person where you don't know what their politics are, you've never had any indication of anything but straight up do the job neutrality. And I don't know there's another human being I can say that about in terms of Carrie Hinton is, I'm going to use the word flawless. She's worked in our office for such a long time. We've seen her work ethic and what she's done in this capacity. So I would be very much in favor of having her be our clerk for the next 6 months. And then let the voters decide who they want.
I was going to respond to that, but I realized I hear you.
Sorry, just a couple clarifying questions. So Ken or Christian, number one, if we appoint her, can she choose to leave the deputy county clerk position open? So you're holding that FTE, you're holding that authority in the budget. Is that possible to December?
It could, that would be up to the clerk.
Okay, It's possible.
Yes, that
Um,
would be one of those decisions on what to do with any vacancies within that office. It would ultimately, like anywhere else, if that position was vacated because she become the clerk, it would be ultimately her decision to fill it or not.
And as Ken alluded, that's been one of the conversations we've been
Mhm.
having, and I don't know that we have a final answer yet on exactly what happens mechanically behind the scenes.
Mhm.
If you appoint, what exactly becomes the status of her position of chief deputy? If she decides to run or not. And then sort of the various ramifications of that could have an impact. Because the question is, can you be both chief deputy and clerk at the same time? If not, then you need to leave one to become the other. What does that do then to the position you left? Does it remain open if you say, for example, she decides not to run? Which could she then be in a position to go back to the chief deputy position? That's sort of one of the questions. So those sorts of things I think are still not 100% settled.
But don't we need to have a chief deputy clerk in case the clerk is in a meeting or on vacation? Or, I mean,
Well,
we were just talking about how we need a chief deputy clerk.
well,
And we haven't talked about this yet, which is why.
you know, as far as that scenario, the one thing that I would also add is, even though we have a chief deputy that is a manager and can exercise all the authorities of the clerk, we also, the staff in the clerk's office are also empowered and sworn to be able to do assigned functions as determined by the clerk and the chief deputy.
Okay.
You know, so there are functions that staff can do.
Okay.
I think, Ken, correct me if I'm wrong though, but there were many years in the past when the county did not have officially a chief deputy clerk position.
It's been a long time. Yeah, because Gail was the chief deputy,
Was that, in fact, that was her title?
and for some reason, I'd have to double check. I don't have it in front of me, but I thought possibly Jan Coleman may have
I
been the
thought there was a
chief
time
deputy
when
clerk.
we were talking about it that there wasn't technically
Yeah.
a chief deputy position, but I could be wrong about that.
And I could be wrong. I think a lot of that might predate it definitely predates my time as being the county administrator and in admin, maybe even
If there wasn't a chief deputy clerk, then yes, I would think the solution in that scenario would be to appoint someone.
So question, I know that, are there other staff in the office? You mentioned that they had the capacity and were the ability to do various functions like weddings and
Mhm.
and different other functions that they have not heretofore been doing, even though they can do them.
Yeah, and for some of those, because now I'm getting into areas that, you know, because I know I've had conversations with Carrie. It's my understanding that they're all sworn, they all have specific work assignments that they do, but it's really up to the clerk on what he's assigning. And as long as it doesn't exceed what's in the job description, or, you know, that's why we have the job descriptions, and I think all the staff are sworn and they go through this process. And so they have the ability, but it's really up to the clerk and the chief deputy clerk on what staff is assigned to do.
Yeah, I mean,
and
and
the
that-
limits of that.
that's what would have been helpful and will be helpful to hear directly from the clerk on things like that. But also there are several deputy clerks, right? That have been appointed, Carolina, Megan. So yeah, I think to your point,
Yeah.
there are other technically appointed deputy clerks who presumably
Right.
could perform many of those.
I
many of
just
those
think
functions.
historically, what the work that's been assigned
Mhm.
may have been in certain areas and not necessarily, I mean, there are limitations because the staff that we are talking about, like in the clerk's office, we're talking about represented staff. So there's a limitation, you know, discipline, hire, expenditure authority, signature
Probation.
authority,
Things like probation.
all those kinds
For
of
deputy
things.
clerks.
There's all those managerial functions that they would not be able to perform without being either a managerial position or the clerk, if that makes sense. So there are some limitations that in those areas.
And I just want to know, the chair had asked a question, and then I derailed us, and then you asked a question, and I just wanted to make sure that since she has the position of being online, did you want to do any follow-up? I just want to make sure
No,
chair gets
no,
her thoughts in. Okay.
Yeah, essentially that office functions like most of our other departments, where you can choose to leave a position open and just hold it over. So my other question though is, if we appoint her, can she decline the appointment? And then is that an option?
Yeah.
Yes, we couldn't force her to accept it and perform those duties unwillingly. I guess that creates if she refuses the appointment and remains the chief deputy,
She's still going to do it.
I wouldn't. She's likely still going to do
No
it.
choice.
You wouldn't have. Ken probably wouldn't see that as insubordination.
No.
I mean, we're in this kind of odd mix, and we're in between, an appointed and an elected. But no, I don't. To answer your question, yes, I think she could say no. She could decline.
Yeah, I think one of the part that an elected clerk is accountable to the voters and has the full authority as long as operating within the policies, because of course the board sets policies that all the departments are subject to. But ultimately the clerk is responsible to the voters and accountable to the voters. The chief deputy or any appointed position, it's a little bit different because again, they work directly for the clerk, but then they also fall under the county administrator ordinance that, to where I have, some authority with employees within that office, and I work closely with the elected department head. So that's one of the things that also kind of adds to this, because if someone's being appointed the clerk, it essentially the buck stops there. I mean, the clerk has the ultimate decision, and they're accountable for those decisions that they're making and how the office is running, and they're accountable to the voters. Whereas, if there's concerns or issues or things, and the office is vacant, if there were accountability issues or concerns that were raised, if it was continued to be the chief deputy, those concerns could come to me, and I'd be working directly with that clerk, with that chief deputy clerk. And it's not that I'm asking to insert myself into the clerk's office or the operations or anything. I'm just kind of pointing to the county administrator ordinance and my function, and just something to think about when it comes to some of those responsibilities.
Okay. So we can say, here you go, you're appointed. You don't have to take it. But she can decide. Yeah, I think, whether right or wrong, I think that as commissioners, this awkward process of making sure that, we're responsible for assigning representation in the absence of representation. And it's an awkward position to be in. Clearly, we would favor an election where the voters choose their representation, but we are in these positions quite often and have been over the past couple of years. I do think it is very important to provide that representation to the public over the next 6 months, given that we have a major election. And I understand, Commissioner Cooley, your point about having an open appointment process, but I feel like we're so far, the timeline is so tight. I mean, we're literally 2 months away from voter pamphlet statements being turned in. So we're already in the throes of the general election, whether anybody sees that externally or not. And so my mind is going towards who's the best qualified executive to conduct this election, who's ready, and she's the only one. And so I actually see it as a very, a very non-political decision. It's more of an executive decision in my mind, in terms of, let's make sure we do our follow through on our role of providing representation where there isn't any. I think that it just, based on engaging the level of interaction that I had over the past, since January, with the county clerk, the level of engagement that our voters have had, questions about the elections, questions about ballots, I think it's super important for them to have, and identify, this is our county clerk. She might only be a county clerk through December, but she is your appointed elected official. She is directly accountable to you. I think that's critical. I also think it matters for Carrie internally, with the department, for her to be appointed and sort of given that title, especially if she's trying to maybe make more of a business decision about how the department is ran, and maybe that's different from how it has been. But she sees it as being more efficient and effective. I think the title does matter for her as well. I'm still leaning towards appointing, just because my overarching reason is that I want the public to have an identified county clerk. She is directly accountable to you. She is taking on the role physically and mentally of being an elected official. And this is our role as commissioners, to make sure that we have representation appointed when there isn't any. I just think it's critical for this election. It's a big election, and I think we're seeing just what happens when you don't have strong leadership and strong accountability to the public. We're seeing that in Clackamas County. I don't want anything like that to happen here. And then as soon as potentially July 7th or 8th, we could start to learn who the voters might have to choose from in terms of the clerk going forward. So I'm still leaning towards appointment.
Chair, I was just thinking about Clackamas County. It seems like we've seen the chair of Clackamas County Board of Commissioners, Chair Smith, having to insert herself in the process and the controversy and just what's been going on there. And she's taken a role in that. I would not like to be part of that mix. I would not want to have to, nor does, I'm sure, our administrator want to be part of interfacing with the public to deal with issues related to elections. So I would like to make sure that is not something that the board has to become involved in. And if we have a clerk, they are out of the auspices of administration and the clerk's office, the Board of Commissioners, to the degree that they are the de facto clerk. Just a couple of thoughts. Clackamas County looms large these days.
One question that occurred to me, and you may have already answered this, and if so, I apologize, but if you were to move forward with appointing her clerk, would it also be your intent then that office take steps as quickly as possible to fill the vacant chief deputy position, to provide the new clerk with the resources and assistance to get through the election? I just didn't know if that is something that had been talked about or considered in terms of the appointment.
That would be up to the clerk.
Yeah, I would defer to her. It's her department and she's in charge.
But it would be clear that she is no longer both the chief deputy and the clerk. It would be the clerk, and then it would be up to her whether or not to fill her old position.
Correct.
That would be her. That would be whoever's appointed to that office. That would be their call.
Right. Okay.
And also, since in some capacity, the chief deputy clerk has functioned as the clerk, couldn't another staff function as the chief deputy clerk, in such as whether or not they're given some kind of an incentive repay or something along those lines? But we also have seen somebody function in a capacity that she was not designated to necessarily have to function in, because we had a clerk that was part-time. So somebody could be doing those duties.
Presumably that would again be up to the clerk, right, to determine if and how to fill those openings and meet those needs.
Correct.
If it would be like maybe a temporary appointment, short-term chief deputy, or if they go out and recruit and hire for a regular chief
Because
deputy?
at that point, and how we would function is much in the same way that we function currently, where we have a clerk in office. It's really,
Right.
we get an approved budget, and it's up to the clerk to determine the staffing levels and the operations of the office. And usually where I get involved is, discussions around, collective bargaining, the policies, hiring policies, all of those other areas to make sure that the actions that are being taken are consistent with whether it's a collective bargaining agreement or hiring policies. So there, again, that is completely up to the clerk on what that staffing looks like. And of course, that's the clerk's call, but also recognizing the times that can also present challenges, and the board may have questions about those things, and nothing's the, much in the same way of inviting the clerk to come and give an update.
And sort of along the lines of what we discussed before, if the board chose to appoint her and she said no, then she would remain the chief deputy.
Correct.
And then the board could choose to appoint someone else if they wanted to. In the meantime, again, recognizing that under statute, she is performing all the obligations and functions of the clerk until such time as there is an appointment anyway, as the chief deputy.
Is she considered the acting clerk at that point?
Statutes don't say. It just says chief deputy. During the period the chief deputy serves, the chief deputy is deemed to continue to occupy the position of chief deputy, and they'll fill that vacant position until such time as someone else who's qualified is appointed by the board. The chief deputy shall perform all of the official acts and duties of such office. That's what it says. So I think that would be, in my view, an appropriate way to refer to that individual, pursuant to ORS 236, 220. You're the acting clerk during this vacancy until there's an appointment or an election.
Until the
to fill
first
that
one
vacancy.
being January or earlier.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Chair, I appreciate your thoughts. I think that you explained your position well, especially about the responsibilities of the Board of Commissioners. But I also come back to the responsibility of the Board of Commissioners is to make sure that there's an open, transparent process for things that aren't the decisions that we make here. And even what we make here is open and transparent process. We are accountable to the people in the community. And that's why the appointment process still strikes me as one that should be open to the community if we're to go the appointment route. And I appreciate the thoughts, especially about who is accountable, especially with elections. It's important that the clerk be accountable. And what accountability looks like is different for everybody, because Clackamas has an elected commission or a county clerk, and they have been held accountable by being reelected. And so accountability, looks like different things, but to me, accountability is really about the community deciding whether they want to keep them or not. And in this case, accountability as the clerk would be, there isn't an obvious mechanism for the community to hold the clerk accountable, I guess, if that makes sense, except through the election process. And if they don't run, then that's a moot point.
They could be recalled.
Can you recall I mean, I guess you could
No, I mean, you could
recall an
recall
appointed
I'm talking about the
elected
elected
official.
clerk, let's say Clackamas County.
Yeah,
If there was an issue.
that was an opportunity. Yeah.
Prior
Good
to
point.
her term ending. The other thing
Yeah.
is this is not the kind of position that someone can walk in off the street, file for and say, I want to be assessor, I want to be clerk. This is something that requires a lot of experience, and the experience that we have a deputy clerk that has gotten. So you can't just come in and say, yeah, I'd like to be clerk, consider appointing me. In the meantime, we're in the middle of a general election. So I think it's important that we look at the experience, the fact that we have somebody, fortunately, who's up to speed on what's going on, and I would be in favor of appointing her.
I would say, Commissioner, that we could, there's nothing stopping us from appointing somebody who doesn't have. So just to clarify, it would not be a good idea,
No,
but nothing would stop us in statute, I think.
except that it would be, we'd have to be accountable for the fact that we put somebody in there who didn't know what they were doing.
It'd be a terrible
It'd be a
decision.
terrible decision.
Ken was about to say something though.
Well, no, the only other thing I would just highlight is, you know, even though it's not seen, but almost Carrie came into her current position and we just lost the chair. Pause for a second. Should I pause or should I go ahead and go?
I'm happy to hear what you have to say. I mean, I'm leaning towards the side that Chair presented, so.
Yeah, so we lost the chair, so hopefully she's in the process of rejoining. But in the meantime, the only thing that I would say is what gets kind of missed is the current chief deputy was applied for and was selected through a competitive open recruitment process to come into that position, and has been appointed to her current position. She went through an extensive process that made her the chief deputy, and she is in an appointed position right now.
Right.
So and I'm kind of looking at Christian, unless there's some other specific statutory requirements. I know we talked about some of the other recruitments, but I think that, or appointments, not recruitments, but the process, there's really not for filling this type of vacancy. There's nothing in statute that requires some specific process that we have to go through. It's really up to the board, correct? To the clerk. Correct. I was trying to lose you, so mission accomplished. No.
Does the clerk need any certifications, requirements,
Right.
credentialing in order to be clerk? I think
So-
that's what you're asking.
So
about, right?
it was kind of two-part. One, I just wanted to clarify that Carrie came into her current position through a
Yeah.
defined hiring policy, open competitive recruitment process that is based on qualifications and interviews and everything. And then
Right.
as we get through that process, she was in fact appointed to be chief deputy clerk. So there was a process that was done for, right, to get into her current position. So just to answer any questions about process in how we do that. My real question wasn't about that, Christian. The second part was around whether or not in statute for appointment to a vacant elected official, is there anything in statute process wise or a requirement that we have to do?
Other than take action to appoint, no.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I'm just
Mhm.
double checking to make sure there aren't any other qualifications for the position of clerk, and I'm fairly certain they're not. You have to
No, I
be
think we've
an elector
We've trod that ground.
in the county, yeah.
Right.
The other thing to consider though, before you decide whether or not to appoint is, we talked about the fact that she could say no. You could have a conversation with her ahead of time to
Thank you.
determine whether or not she would be inclined to accept or not. So that you wouldn't necessarily be back here if she were to say no, having to decide whether or not to appoint someone else. That's entirely up to the board if you wanted to wait.
Yeah.
And get a sense of that before you voted to appoint, or if you want to go ahead and appoint.
I had the same thought because with her being on vacation and not available, and admittedly, I have not had, because again, it's kind of the nature of my role, or kind of the limits on the types of conversations that I would have with staff, about appointments, or running for office, or those are not conversations that we have with staff. So based on the discussion today, I know Carrie is on vacation, and it might be worthwhile to, at least if I could have the conversation, she may be watching this meeting at some point. I know Carrie.
I doubt it. She's in Disney World.
Yeah.
I wouldn't be surprised if she's on a ride right now watching that. So,
Let's make a bet.
so there's no, I just wanted to, again, we have a chief deputy clerk that can assume the functions of the office due to the vacancy. And so I'm just putting that out there that it doesn't require an immediate action today. And it's, there's no requirement to do that. It's really up to the will of the board and how you'd like to proceed as far as how quickly.
So first of all, thank you, Megan and Caroline. I got lost in cyberspace there for a minute. So thanks. I don't want to wait until the last minute. That's the only thing that makes me hesitate on this. Is she can always decline it, but I want this to be set. We still have yet to hear from the clerk, and I suppose it's my expectation that come potentially the 30th or the whatever our next meeting is, the first meeting in July, that we would hear from Carrie, that she would come for the board and discuss the transition and also her plans as to what she's going to do for the next 6 months. And so I would just rather, get this established now, so we're not waiting until the last minute. We can't really talk to her and can't have a discussion. We'd have to come back on the 23rd, and Commissioner Kula won't be here. The 30th to me is too late. That's the last day. So, I appreciate the discussion. I think the process is quite clear. These appointment processes are strange anyway, especially like the one for the state representative. Is not an open process that is open to voters. It's open to, PCPs, and it's a very closed, sort of awkward. And so that's the play. And I just don't think that opening this up for an open appointment process when we are already working towards the general election internal, public may not see, but it's already happening, is just kind of futile. We trust Carrie to do the job. This executive decision in terms of making sure the integrity around our elections secure. We have a plan, the plan established for 30th come on. We have a plan. And then, however,
Hey, Chair, I'm
Sorry.
sorry to interrupt you. Your audio is cutting in and out more aggressively.
Did I shut off?
Cameras froze as
yeah.
well.
That's right.
Oh, and we just lost.
She may have just decided to try it again.
But I guess while we're waiting for the chair to, okay, here we go. There we go.
Oh, she's moving.
Okay, we can see.
Good.
Can you hear me?
It looks like your screen had frozen on your camera and you were breaking up pretty badly. So I think we were having a real difficult time hearing.
Okay, it's on my end. The internet is very unstable, so my apologies. Okay, so I don't know where I broke in what part of my topic discussion, but I was just saying basically, I see this as more of an executive decision in terms of making sure we have a plan and that the public is aware that there's a plan over the next 6 months. We have the top qualified person to serve as a clerk. She's already working towards the general election. And I was saying that, you know, these appointment processes are clunky and not really open to the public anyway, just by the nature of them. And an example would be the state rep appointments that we've been through. I don't love that process, but that's what it is. And this is our role, is to provide representation for the public in these positions that go vacant. So if she chooses not to accept the appointment, that's completely her prerogative. But I do think that we should move forward on having a plan. Commissioner Kula won't be here next week, so that is problematic. I would want to be present for the vote if I were him. And I think the 30th is too late. So I would move that we approve, or excuse me, appoint Carrie Hinton as the county clerk for the next 6 months.
Just to clear, that appointment would be effective July 1st.
July 1st through December 31st of 2022. And so there's a motion on the floor. Is there further discussion?
I would say that I would just like to add, Chair, that your examples of appointments are ones that are dictated by state law. And we get to decide here what our appointment process is, as far as I understand. And I think that's an important thing for the public to know, is that right now we're deciding whether or not to appoint one person to a position that we could open to the public, to anybody who's over 18 and has lived in Yamhill County for over 6 months. And we have a person who's doing the work, who's the chief deputy, who's ready to do all the responsibilities. So again, my hesitation is that we are choosing to do a closed process when we could do an open process of appointment. And I know that our chief deputy clerk is fully capable of running a successful election and is beginning the process of running that successful election.
Chair, I'd like to
Appreciate
that. I'd like to offer that that we could, as a board, open this up in the middle of with a few months left for a general election and have someone who doesn't know what they're doing run the election. And that would be, I think, the height of incompetence as a board. And I don't think anyone would advocate for that. And I think the public will get a chance to make a decision when there is a slate of candidates that have chosen to file for this office. And I expect that there will be. And that is an open and transparent process. And there's nothing more transparent than what we've done here, is to talk about the pros and cons. I think we have someone who, whether or not she's appointed, is going to continue to function as the clerk. She might as well have the title, and that the constituents and people in our community have the confidence that they have a clerk, and that we're not going to insert ourselves in any conflicts or concerns that they might have. It's someone they can go right to. So I'd be in favor of that.
And Chair, Commissioner, to add to that, I just want to say that I think that I'll be voting yes, but I did want to note that I think it's important for the public to also know that the chief deputy clerk now, and if we vote to appoint that person, and if that person accepts, that they will have our support, verbally backing them up, making sure that they have the funding necessary, and working with county administrator as well. Just, I think it's important to also acknowledge that.
Thank you.
Right.
Appreciate that.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, so if there's no further discussion, I will call the vote. And the motion is to appoint Carrie Hinton as the county clerk with a term starting July 1st, 2022 through December 31st, 2022. If there's no further discussion.
One question. Are we, I'm trying to think of the calendar. If we're appointing through the end of the calendar year, does it need to be, I haven't looked at a calendar, but when would the first
When would a
business day
new-
in January that typically the swear-ins would happen. Would we,
I haven't looked at a calendar either.
I
Yeah.
have one on
What we
there.
could do is if it needs to happen, the board could come back later and appoint
okay,
the person.
Couldn't
you
we
could al-
also just say through the end of until a new clerk takes over? Or,
Or
Until
until
the clerk's new term.
until the
The
new
third?
clerk is elected, right? And then you could, I mean,
Sworn in.
Well, it's a pretty specific timeline because his term is not ending at the end of the year.
you might.
but the new term is beginning.
It is possible the person you're appointing might not be the person who's elected.
Yeah.
So then the question would be, would you want this person to continue to serve after the election until the new term begins for whoever is elected? And if so, then the end of the year is probably appropriate. Or you could make the term effective July 1st, 2022 until such time as someone is elected to fill the position. And then if the board chose, you could, if it is not the same person you're appointing, that person's term could begin earlier than January of next year.
I like
you- if
Commissioner
you-
Sterrett's proposal.
Wasn't that, would have been the 3rd of January? Because that would be the time.
That's,
it would-
that's,
is that-
that's completely appropriate too.
the only reason I was asking, I was thinking of the situation where we had a retirement and then the board had to take additional action, I thought, because there was to fill that time period between the retirement that happened at the end of the calendar year before the new elected official took office. It seemed like
That was the sheriff, and there was some specific statutory requirements around transferring the duties of the sheriff that won't apply here, but
Okay,
if you have concerns about that, the term could be
we could
from
address it later.
July 1, 2022 until such time as the clerk who is elected in November of 2022 is sworn into office.
Because when I took office, I was appointed because my predecessor left
Correct.
early, 5 months early. So I
Right.
took office in June.
You took office early, right? And you had been elected in the primary. And so you filled the role you would have been appointed to in January. You took that role 5 months early.
And the board could do the same thing in
The board could do the same
November.
thing following
Oh.
the certification of the election in November for the new clerk.
Right.
If it's not the same person, or even if it is the same person.
Yeah.
We'll just swear them in. Well, I don't know about that,
But
but
I think that Commissioner Sterrett's GN3 observation it covers a lot of ground.
Mhm.
So, sorry, I'm confused as to why the term wouldn't start on the first Monday of January.
Because I think that's a holiday. I'm assuming that the 2nd could conceivably be because the 1st is on a Sunday. Is that considered?
No, Monday is the 2nd. So as far as I know, per statute, if we reset the term, the newly elected clerk would start on January 2nd of 2023.
But I don't know that that person would be sworn in on the 2nd or perhaps sworn in on the 3rd because the 2nd might be a holiday.
The 2nd is observed as New Year's Day because the 1st is on Sunday.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Okay, so it'd be January 3rd.
and then the question
we can amend
I
it if
still
we
have
need to.
is the swearing in the point? Is that the moment in time when they take office, or do they take office?
Yeah, because I was sworn in on January 3rd.
Well, it's
And I
not.
do-
You're
That's what
sworn,
happened.
it's yeah. I don't know. I'm looking to Christian. You answer that.
Yeah, I don't know.
Statute.
Off the top of my head, I don't know.
You're not
Which is
sworn
why I
in,
would
you're-
say maybe make the term from July 1, 2022 until such time as the new clerk who's elected in November is sworn into office.
But elected and sworn in is a couple of months difference.
That's what I'm saying. You could make it, the appointed term would be from July 1, 2022 until the clerk who is elected in November is sworn in
Oh, we're
January.
sworn in. I'm sorry. I
Because
misunderstood.
if that's December 30th or December 10th or January
That-
3rd, right?
That presumably would bridge whatever gap might or might not exist.
Okay, sorry, I was sworn on January 4th. So, okay, so I will amend my motion then to appoint Carrie Hinton as the county clerk from July 1st, 2022 through
January
Yeah.
3rd.
January 3rd of 2023. And I think that gets us there. That bridges the gap.
Sorry, Christian, we're going to vote on a different motion than you.
That's okay. I mean, I think either works. If we need to change it later, the board can always change the appointment.
Yeah.
To a different date.
Okay.
Okay, so the motion has been amended. Is there further discussion?
No, Chair.
No? Okay. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed, same sign. Okay, motion passes. And congratulations to Carrie. And we look forward to hearing from her as to what her plans are for the next 6 months and getting through the November election too.
Maybe we better not say anything while she's on vacation. So it doesn't
Yeah, don't tell her. Don't tell her till she gets back.
work.
There'll be an.
Oh, by the way, while you're on vacation.
Okay, so it looks like we are now on item J, public hearings, and I'm going to open the public hearing, which is our receipt of public comments with regard to the 2022-23 county budget. And so we'll open it up for any public comments that are coming in, whether it's in the room. Welcome, Hallie, and just for the record, please state your name and address for us.
I'm Haley Ruttenclaw, 12500 Southwest Salt Creek Road, Amity, Oregon, 97101. So I'm coming to make public comments today. I'm on the Yamhill County Extension Budget Committee, and during the proceedings for that, that budget is running a bit short. And so a program I care deeply about was cut from that budget. And that was $5,000. It's been in there for a while to support a faculty research assistant to assist Nicole Anderson, who is currently serving as the crops extension agent for the North Valley, Yamhill, Polk, and Washington counties. And Yamhill County had been providing out of the extension service budget, $5,000 towards that faculty research assistant. That was not included in the budget that was just adopted earlier today. And I would request if there was a way to include that funding out of economic development dollars and provide funding for that faculty research assistant out of the county economic development money. What the work Nicole does directly impact us as farmers, has a large impact in what we're able to do and how efficiently and economically we are able to farm. And it does help make the farming in Yamhill County as I said, as efficient as possible to allow us to produce as much crops for as little input as possible. So it is of great importance to us. There has, however, been an update since the Yamhill County budget was presented in that Nicole, so this changes things a little bit. Nicole has been, has received a promotion, and she will be starting on July 1 as the statewide extension specialist for grass seed based at Oregon State University and no longer based here in the county. However, that is what she's told. That's what we have been told. She does not yet have her paperwork for that July 1. So we assume it's going through. It should be going through. And so with her moving her base to campus to Oregon State University, as she's no longer a county-based faculty, the county has pulled back their funding for her travel as well. So she has lost now all funding from Yamhill County. Her intent is to still maintain, the North Valley will be without coverage of a extension crops agent. And it will be a while before the state, it works its way up the priority list within the state extension process to get filled again. So it could be a little while that this area is without a county extension crops agent. Nicole's intention is to still cover this area and to still help make sure that research is done in the north part of the valley. And so I think it's even of greater importance now, if possible, that Yamhill County helps support that for specific North Valley research to make sure we have research that's targeted to the North Valley area. And so my original request was for the 5,000. That was the thought. I'm not sure if that's possible to be at 10,000 to help make up for that additional travel that will be required, but at least a 5,000, I'd very much like to request that. I don't know how that process works within the general county budget, and I believe you've already done your whole budget work, so I'm coming at the very last minute to request a change.
Thank you. Well, this is definitely the time to request changes. So that's, you're right on there. So I have a question, and maybe I'm just not clear on this, but the research assistant, which is who is being funded, does that person then, because it's not Nicole, right? It's someone else. So does that person go with Nicole, or where does that person go?
Plan is that person will still be based in this north part of the valley and carry out the research that Nicole was doing. So that research will still be ongoing. And so the funding will determine, I guess, the extent of the research.
And I guess, Hallie, thank you, first of all, for bringing this forward. Thank you for bringing it up at the meeting. And then thank you for following up on it, because follow-up is like the goal, right? But you have to follow up, you know this. And I'm going to test my own budget knowledge here by saying that there is money appropriated in economic development in appropriation lines. Is that accurate, Ken?
Mhm.
So there is money that will be available in the next fiscal year that doesn't immediately have a specific location. Am I still correct?
That's correct.
Okay, that's good. And that the Board of Commissioners could decide to transfer $10,000 as a one-time economic development fund to OSU Extension, specifically for travel and the faculty research assistant. That still, we can still adopt this existing budget without having that specific tagged line for it. I would be supportive of that, of directing 10,000 to OSU Extension for that, but we wouldn't have to change our budget. If that makes sense.
Okay.
And I think I'm accurate. in all
You
that.
are, but there's some other options also
Okay.
available depending on how we're doing this, and much in the same way as we do in May before the budget committee, where we have the hearing, we hear requests, and then on Wednesday we go into consideration and deliberation, and we identify the sources of funding that you would want to identify in the funds. So if you're correct that we do have funds. In fact, as part of the budget process in May, we're holding more funds fully appropriated in economic development to facilitate discussions for funding requests and long-term planning for that fund. Or, if the board wanted to increase something like 1039 and move discretionary funds, or ONC or landfill, we have the whole list of discretionary funds that we fully appropriate and have available for these types of funding requests that may come up throughout the budget year. So yes, and you have several options available.
Okay.
I'm wondering if we were to take this out of impacted industries and maybe use some ARPA funding to cover this. I'm looking at what you sent us. Now it's gone. Anyway, I agree with you, Commissioner Kula, that it would not necessitate any kind of change to the existing budget or the budget that we've got in front of us today, but it would be another option.
And I want to be careful because we're in the public hearing, so I want to make sure that
Yeah.
we're receiving that. But I also have some other questions, because typically when we get these types of funding requests, do we know that, one, if we made the funds available to OSU Extension, are they going to accept the funds and apply them?
So I have a little bit of an answer to that. So I talked to
Okay.
Nicole about that because she said she will be losing her Yamhill County accounts. But her suggestion was the Ag Research Foundation at OSU is the easiest way to receive money for her. So that would where she would request if possible, otherwise the Crop and Soil Science Department.
Let's make sure that we get.
Okay, so that answers my question, because this person would be directly accountable and work under Nicole still, correct?
Correct.
Okay,
So in terms of basically her employment, it's now through OSU.
It will be, yes.
It will be, and these would be designated to cover this specific body of work,
In the Yamhill County area, yes.
right? So if that doesn't happen, none of that work would continue, is what you're saying.
No, Nicole said she would still try to make sure she came up to this area and still covered this area. But she said it makes it easier to do experiments here because there would be funding to run those experiments. You will still be covering this area, but it's a question of the depth of work and how it directly impacts this area and the crops we grow.
Because I would want to know, I mean, because if we start throwing round numbers and say, okay, well, 5,000 for this, we'll throw in another 5 for travel. I think it gets a little bit muddied when we just start writing checks based on something we don't have any accounting for.
Yes.
So that's the only issue that I would
Yes,
have.
she can provide back. I'm sure she can provide back an accounting for how she spent the money.
And I would just add that we more than likely, because this is sounding more like a grant or something along those lines, that we wouldn't, if there are specific conditions related to the use of these funds, that we're giving these funds to an organization for specific purposes, there should probably be an agreement that goes long before we release the funds. So that would be subject to any of the discussions, this is, I'm kind of getting down into the weeds at this point but that, if this were added as a specific line item in the budget, which is what we're in the process of adopting a budget, or if we're just having the discussion. And if you want to have a later discussion, because I do think we have some funds, ONC, landfill license reserve, ARPA, economic development. We do have those 4 accounts that we do have funds appropriated for these types of requests that may come up, and like we've seen historically, that come up during the fiscal year. But at the same time, if we're wanting to add a specific line item to the 22-23 budget that identifies when we appropriate $10,000 for this specific purpose, then I would, that you could do that as well. And we would just need the details on which fund we would put this in. And so we can build those adjustments to get it ready for final adoption.
Commissioner Kula, your point about not inserting this or in any way impacting our budget, I appreciate that. And I think there are other places where this would be better suited. And I also think if it were a grant, in other words, if you write for grant, you've got specifics, you've got a scope of work, and then you've got the accountability. Here, it seems a bit too, no strings attached, here's a check. So I would like to look at all those other options, and we don't have to do it today.
Right.
But we can
We don't have to do it.
perhaps signal our interest in our,
Mhm.
our sort of conditional support of the concept, and then go forward with more down the road.
Okay.
right. And I think we're having ARPA discussions on July 7th. Is that correct? So we could incorporate this discussion perhaps in those when we're talking about impacted industries and economic development.
Haley, what's the timeline though?
I don't know.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, because that's a good question too, because I would also highlight that we have funds available. I mean, because again, everything that we're talking about here, we wouldn't be able to cut checks until July 1, because we're talking about,
Mhm.
this is a hearing related to eventual adoption of the 22-23 budget. So this is something that, again, like I said before, if there's a specific line item, or if, if we want to put that on our deliberation list with the other changes, we can do that, or you could have this flagged for a conversation. And I do believe we have a lot of, not a lot, but we have funds that do have funds available for these types of requests, and for this size, so.
So Ken, along those lines, just to make sure that we wrap this up into a stable spot. If, because Commissioner Sterry is very correct that we need to be able to justify what our expectations are, where the money go, what happened with the money, what results. It seems like in order to have the time really to work out, there is time between now and actual adoption of budget to get something, perhaps
Get something from Nicole
Yeah.
specifically, yes.
and that could be on the adoption deliberation list. Right?
Well, I'll have a list for those changes, but there's a couple options. I think at this point, we could proceed with the budget adoption process, and everything that you described, like if a written proposal were to come forward, it would be an agenda item on the board, and you
Yeah.
would talk about it, and you'd ask me, hey, how are we going to pay for this? And I would give suggestions
Yeah.
on which funds, where we have funds appropriated or available to do that, and then the board could take action on that. That could happen today. If you had something today and
Yeah.
the funds would come
Yeah,
out
exactly.
of the current fiscal year, or
Mhm.
post, it doesn't necessarily have to be tied to the budget adoption process.
Yeah.
Okay.
So you have options.
And I think it would be great, not obviously not speaking for the other commissioners, but I think it would be great to learn, like, okay, this is the money you'll use for work that is done in Yamhill County to help Yamhill County and Northern Willamette Valley
Yes.
farms specifically.
Makes
And
sense.
at some point, I should probably just declare a potential conflict of interest, since I also grow grains in the Willamette Valley.
Rutabagas, the rutabaga.
There are
defense.
some rutabaga. Yeah, I actually just have grains. I have no rutabaga at the moment, but I might in the future.
You never know. If the research pans out, you might decide to go into rutabagas.
Yes, that's right.
It's profitable.
We'll talk about that later.
Well, I think it's definitely worth exploring. I mean, we know, I was just having a conversation with Abisha about this issue, and I think the statistic is 45%. I don't know if it's quite that high, but close, of farmers are not planting because of the high cost of inputs this year. So, I mean, anything we can do to help support our farmers in terms of the research behind that and lowering the cost of inputs, et cetera, I think is absolutely economic development. So maybe, I don't know if I'm sort of getting the consensus, but is it that Helly will go back and maybe get from Nicole a plan as to how the money is going to be spent, and then perhaps we discuss that on the 7th? Is that kind of what I'm hearing?
It sounds like we could discuss it before then if Keely and Nicole had something, but at least by the 7th, Chair.
Because
we took
just
out
to
his
clarify,
last-
no, just to clarify, because typically the only time that it requires that we do something during the budget is if it's a request that we don't have appropriation identified somewhere in the budget, that we need to increase our expenditures in order to satisfy the request.
Yeah.
And,
And we have that.
and we have that.
Right. Do you know your tasks now?
Yes,
Okay.
thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
you.
I don't think we,
Okay. We have further public comment virtually or in the audience?
we do not.
Okay, so this isn't really meant to be commissioners discussing and asking questions. It's just meant to be,
It could, you could close the hearing to any further public comment. We can close that portion. And I actually have a handout with a list of proposed changes that we would like to make prior to adoption. And then it's up to the board if you want to act on making a decision on the proposed changes today. We do have one more formal session before the 30th when we actually do budget adoption. I would just ask that because there's a lot of work in preparing all the documents and the appropriation schedule and everything we have to do, that if there's going to be any requested substantial changes to the budget, if we could do that today or next week at the latest, so we can ensure we have sufficient time to get those changes and have the budget ready for budget adoption on the 30th. But if you're okay, Chair, I know I emailed.
Yes.
Is it the same thing that we got this morning as an email?
Correct.
Yes.
Great.
Okay.
And I have handouts here with the same thing that I emailed.
I don't have to see it.
Yeah, I can't read. Look how little that is. Thank you.
So,
okay, well, let me go ahead and close the public hearing. Seeing no further public comment on the budget, I will go ahead and close the hearing and we're gonna open up to discussion of the proposed changes.
all right, so this is always the part that gets process wise at times can get a little confusing. So we've had the hearing, we had the approved budget, it's been noticed, we had the hearing, we closed the hearing. And as we have every single year, because again, we start the budget process very early in January when we start building budgets. It's not unusual when we start coming forward and get into the final weeks of the current fiscal year that we get become aware of grant awards or projects or expenditures that aren't, they were planned to be spent by the end of the fiscal year, but it looks like they're not, and we need to make sure that we have the appropriations carrying forward. So what it really ends up doing is we end up with additional revenues and additional beginning balances that we need to make adjustments for each year. So in this handout, what I've put together, we do a last call for budget changes prior to adoption to all the departments. And in the packet, what you have, we have $9.9 million of changes to expense. And just really quickly, Public Works, that $900,000 that they're adding, that was because we got, that's a grant award reimbursement. It's not really a grant, it's a reimbursement. It is a grant. So it's $900,000 of additional revenue and expense specific for the Deer Creek Bridge. The Sheriff's Office just became aware that the Oregon State Marine Board increased the amount for the Marine Patrol budget. So you're going to see an additional $10,000 in revenue there. And then we have the corresponding expense lines where we would record that. The 1081 Parks, there's a project that's currently underway that's going to be carried over into the new year, but then also with some vacancy savings that they've also had that adjusted their beginning balance. And this was such a small budget, they count every dollar. So so we want to make sure we get that incorporated into their budget, and that's all going to be budgeted in capital improvements. 4027 capital reserve. Those changes are specific to we missed on the when we put out budget instructions, the new HHS building in Newburgh. In conversations with Director Manfred, we'd like to get that building. It's not going to be included in facilities maintenance, but they want to pay into the capital replacement fund. And so we have a formula for doing that. So we're going to start having funds transferred in as part of all the other buildings that HHS pays into the capital reserve fund. So that's reflected with that we didn't have the new Newburgh building on the schedule. And so we corrected that. The district attorney's office, this is specific. He had a capital line that he anticipated that he was going to spend it all before the end of the fiscal year. It looks like with the order delays for the furniture order that he was making, that there's delays and we're not going to get receipt of those materials and pay for those materials until we get into the new fiscal year. So that's why you see the $20,000 carried over. And then HHS every year we have a laundry list of changes that we make because again, they get things kind of late, grant awards, and that's the majority of it. And if you look at the attached spreadsheet, I asked Christina and Lindsay to provide more detailed information. And there's really two funds in particular that are contributing to all of the sizable increase you're seeing here. And part of that is related to House Bill 4004. That was a grant award that we just became aware of. And we're currently having some extensive discussions and planning around that. And then also the increase, if you look down the state health grant, there was additional funds for behavioral health also through OHA. So if there's particular questions between those are really the driver for most of the changes that you're seeing in the budget. As I said in the email, the big thing that I always keep an eye on that we're not increasing expenditure to the approved budget above, they don't exceed 10%. If they exceed 10%, there's some additional requirements under Oregon budget law, and we're below that threshold for all the proposed changes in these funds as proposed.
Commissioners, any questions on the changes?
No, Chair, I was expecting these from conversations we've had, so.
Okay, and then just to clarify, Ken, which fund does that new HHS grant go into?
Let's see, they have that identified. The revenue is 16 we've already received the funds, so that's going to be reflected in their beginning balance. So they're going to be booking that in Fund 16. If you're speaking specifically to the House Bill 4004 funds, those are specific for behavioral health programs. So, and I don't have the number right off the top of my head, but Fund 16, that'll be reflected in the adjusted beginning balance because they actually received the funds this fiscal year, but they're not appropriated until the budget gets adopted. So we can't spend it until we get into the next fiscal year.
Okay, that makes sense. And then I didn't see, maybe I just missed it, but how are the changes that we discussed in the budget committee in terms of economic development and second core and sort of consolidating that work? How are those reflected?
We increased the appropriations. We moved funds out of the ending balance reserve for the future lines, like in Fund 26, and we moved that into an expenditure line. We just increased expenditures to make sure that we had funds available to pay for whatever decisions come out of those discussions.
Okay, so that doesn't need to be reflected here.
No, because that was already approved by the budget committee during deliberations to take those actions.
Gotcha. Okay. Okay, commissioners, any further questions?
Again, really the primary function of what we're doing here is in preparation for budget adoption is making sure that there's sufficient appropriation authority in the new fiscal year when we adopt the budget. So when we have these unanticipated, unplanned revenues that have come in, we want to make sure that not only are we booking those revenues, but then we're fully appropriating the expenditure so then you can spend the money in the new fiscal year.
Yeah, and I see that the House Bill 4004 money in the end balance as well to balance out that beginning fund balance. So for me, I'm good. Thank you.
I'm good, thank you. I'm just looking at the HHS, some of the specifics in here. And I need more time with them, but ultimately, the bottom line is we're just,
The fact that you know what they mean is, huge. I mean,
Oh.
I know what they mean, but I know even more.
only took 8 years
Right.
to figure that out. Thank you for doing the work
Yeah.
on this, and thank you, Justin, and everybody who worked on getting it to this point. It's a lot of work.
Yeah, and if I think it might be helpful. I think each year we kind of stumble kind of through this, but I think it would be helpful if the board was okay to consider and taking action on this as proposed, because these are going to be changes that will incorporate into version 40 and it'll be reflected. Because I know you're going to take action on it on the 30th for budget adoption on the whole thing, but because we are making revisions to the approved budget, I think it would be good to have an action on this.
Yeah, would that be approving the changes?
As presented.
Yeah,
Okay.
Chair, Chair, I would move that we approve the changes to the 2022-2023 budget as presented today.
Approved budget.
Approve the budget
Approved
Approved budget.
budget.
of the approved budget.
Correct.
So Chair, I move that we approve the changes to the approved 2022-2023 budget as presented today.
Sounds good. Okay, Commissioner Kula moves approval. Any further discussion? Nope. Okay, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye, all opposed, same sign. Okay, motion passes. Thank you.
And so just really quick, the next step, as I've said multiple times, we're going to be working on incorporating these modifications into it. They'll be reflected in version 40, which is going to be the budget that the board will be considering on June 30th. And we're working on preparing the resolution, the appropriation schedule, and all the steps. So have one more step and we'll have a budget for July 1.
Okay, thank you, Ken.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Do we have any further agenda items under other business or anything we want to add? No? Okay, that brings us to announcements. Just a couple quick announcements. Ken touched on it earlier, but the board has officially recognized Juneteenth as a county holiday. So Monday will be when we observe the holiday. So the county offices will be closed. This weekend is also Father's Day. So I wanted to acknowledge all of our wonderful fathers and the role that they play in our families and just in our county. I hope you have a special day on Father's Day. And then last thing from me is the youth wage grant. And I know Commissioner Kula, you probably talked about this at Willamette Workforce Partnership meeting. Can't remember when that was, a couple weeks ago, but so the youth wage grant is a program where Lynn, Marion, Polk, and Yamhill counties, our employers can participate. So long as you have less than 35 employees, you can participate. And basically, you are reimbursed for hiring a young, new, first-time person. So ages 14 to 17. If you hire them and it's their first job, you are reimbursed $5 an hour for that person up to $6,000. So it's a wonderful program for getting our youth kind of involved in helping mentor them and providing skills, and also helping with the shortage of labor that we have going on. I'm not sure, maybe Commissioner Kula, you know, but I'm not sure how much money has sort of been allocated to Yamhill County in our bucket. I'm working with Abisha to find that out, but I would like us to promote it, especially over the summer. And so I've sent Ken some of the information that Marion County is doing in terms of their promotions that they put on Facebook and other places, to make sure their employers are aware of that. And like I said, I'm not sure how much money we have allocated to us. Marion County actually kind of filled the meter, if you will, and plugged in more money and put county funds to it so that it would be a larger pot of money for their employers. That's certainly on the table for us as well, but I want to make sure we know what our capacity is. And, you know, if it's $12,000, that's only 2 employers, right, over the course of maybe the summer, that we can help. So I just like to have a frame of reference on that. So I will be providing that information when we get it.
Chair,
Sure.
an addition.
Well, I was just going to ask a little bit about, is that something we could put on our website, or it is, because in terms of how do employers apply for that?
Yeah, I think Willamette Workforce Partnership actually manages it. So
Okay, thank you.
they would apply through that. And then commissioners, any announcements?
I just have that, so I'm a member of the OSU Extension Northwest Research and Research and Experiment Station, so NRAC, their advisory council, and we have a new director. So y'all might remember Mike Bondi was the director and stayed longer than he perhaps wanted to until retirement. Dara Surendra is the new director, and we had our first in-person meeting. He actually had COVID, so he was not there with us. But I will try to keep you updated on as things move forward. A lot of projects were on hold because of COVID and then because of retirement, and our building projects are now happening at the experiment station. So, and it is our experiment station as well. So keep you posted.
All right, thank you for that. Just a couple of things. Yesterday was the AOC legislative retreat. It was in Hermiston. I was not there in person, but a lot of folks were. And a couple of things that were topics of discussion were just in terms of the contact of the sheriff about this, and that is the medical costs for our pretrial detainees and how NACO is working on that. And we're trying to get behind that, as is the sheriff's organization. So about $700,000 of our medical costs can be attributed to this. So hopefully we can get that addressed at the federal level. And the other thing is there were frustrations about local control and with Oregon Health Authority from commissioners in urban counties and rural counties. The other thing is we've got some good news, and that is Northwest Senior and Disability Services is going to have funding for 2 positions to help with difficulty in helping with the difficulties of housing seniors. So it's a housing navigator, 2 Medicaid funded positions to help with filling out applications, moving deposits, things like that. And hopefully they will be working with YCAP and with the Housing Authority. There are 2 vacancies which are posted on our website. I checked yesterday to make sure. Northwest Senior Advisory Council has an opening for 1 person in Yamhill County, and the Disabilities Advisory Council has one for Yamhill County. So if people are interested, please do check that out. Also worked on supporting a grant through Youth Outreach for the Transitional Living Program for our 18 to 21-year-old kids who have been, living sometimes couch surfing, and that's through a federal program. And just one more update with our emergency manager, and working on some of the issues where people are concerned about active shooter plans countywide. And Sergeant Young has talked about working with Sergeant Travis under the auspices of the mass casualty plan to work with law enforcement, schools, and also with Dr. Heiser, who is the medical director for our fire departments. So just a couple of updates there, and that's all I have.
And Commissioner Starr, I just want to add too that we were discussing earlier, but along the lines of Northwest Senior and Disability Services and Elders and Housing is that the Lafayette Trailer RV Park, mobile home park has been noticed as being put up for sale. The residents have formed a committee. They've made that decision and are kind of moving forward with being part of the purchase process or the sale and purchase process. So stay tuned, but it feels like an important thing in the context of senior housing. So I want to make sure that's out there.
And the Housing Authority and Northwest Seniors and YCAP will be
Yes.
be
exactly.
notified. Thank you for that.
They know about it now.
Great, thank you. Ken, Christian, any announcements?
Yeah, just circling back real briefly to the appointment of the clerk. You were correct. You had the information more immediate in hand than I did as elected officials. That makes sense. But since we've now talked about it, the statute will remain ingrained in my head now for forever. ORS 204020 talks about when the term of office commences, and it says the term will commence on the first Monday of January following election. This year, that Monday is the 2nd, which is a holiday. I believe the motion you acted on made the appointed term through January 3rd. If we need to come back and address that, Ken and I can talk about it, and we can come back and clarify that, because that's the slight wrinkle this year, given the way in which the observed holiday is going to fall. But technically under the statute, it appears that the term would begin on the first Monday of January following the election, which would be January 2nd, but we'll circle back with that. So just wanted to clarify that. Thank you.
Thank you.
That's all I had. Unless you want to talk about the UEFA Nations League. Soccer.
Is that soccer? Am I hearing soccer
I mean,
or football?
Get back to you on that.
Okay. Fair enough.
Okay. Well, if there's nothing else for the good of the order, I will adjourn our Yamaha County Board of Commissioners formal and informal session for June 16th, 2022. And it is 12:02. Thank you very much and have a wonderful Father's Day weekend.
Thank you.
thank you.
Thanks.